Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. This is a bit of a shorter episode with one of our favorite guests, Stevenson-Yang. We wanted to get her back on the show and do a quick autopsy on the last 4 years of the Trump administration's impact on the U.S.-China relationship, and then a look forward at what the Biden administration's relationship might look like now that we have a month of data to work with to try and make some of those predictions. We look at who the players were and will be, what happened with regards to the tariff war and where that might go next, and some discussion around security and the technology race going forward. And for those looking ahead, we'll be doing the same with another of our favorite guests, James McGregor, so make sure to look out for that one next week as well. Enjoy.
If you look at the China relationship with the optic, do we love China or do we hate China, then maybe Biden still kind of hates China, or, at least he doesn't love China. But that's not the point at all. And in fact, even Trump was not at all consistent on this point. Initially, Xi Jinping was his best friend in the world, and China was a great success, and he wanted to save jobs for ZTE. And, it was really only in the election cycle that he started on the hate China thing. But it wasn't coordinated across government agencies. It wasn't driven by any strategy or any policy.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. And welcome back to the show. It's good to have you again.
Well, thanks. Good to be here.
As I said in the introduction, we're taking a quick look back and then a quick look forward. So everybody knows this is all just their opinions. Obviously, we don't have the crystal ball. So let's take a quick look back at the overall successes and failures and do a bit of an autopsy of the Trump administration as it relates to the U.S.-China policy that they had over the last 4 years.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to find a success. I mean, we're looking at a much bigger trade gap than we used to have, a lot of hostility, a reduction in interchange between the two countries, and what has been gained exactly. Really, I can't come up with anything. Now, I don't put the blame entirely on Trump's shoulders. I think that really the culprit Trump, obviously, at least to me, really flubbed international policy, particularly with China. But I think that the general attitude change toward China should really be chalked up to Xi Jinping and not to Trump. I think that he's screwed up even more royally than Trump did.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Can you maybe break that down? Because, I think we're getting to the point of listen, both characters behaved rather poorly, and we could have done a lot better. Can you point to some examples of exactly how?
Let's back up first and say that I think that the most important thing for the U.S.-China relationship is to be the America that we used to be or that we try to be, meaning import of talent, an innovation center where we invest in our technology, where we have diverse people from all over the world who are interested in coming to America to join startups, where we have a culture of growth and innovation and excitement. So, that's really important. And the Trump administration, one of its key failures was that it did not cut illegal immigration, it cut legal immigration. And legal immigration tends to be of the more educated groups of people. And those are the people you don't want to stop from coming to America. So you want American universities to be centers of innovation. That's really important. and we need to go back to that. You also want a lot of investment in technology and technology development, and you want really strong companies. You don't want stock market bubbles. You want investment. So, I think we really need to go back to those things. And the general hostility toward China and the labeling of China as, an evil actor just doesn't really accomplish anything. It's not focused on anything.
The perception of China and its role in the world, I want to say dramatically shifted, but I also have to be aware that I have been out of the country for just over for about 4.5 years now, too. So I have a distanced ability to be able to perceive what that is. Plus, I moved out of the U.S. in that time as well. So I left that kind of temperature as well. So if we were to say that the perception of China and its role in the world from the West point of view has changed, perhaps dramatically, how would you attribute this shift? Would you say it's something to do with the PRC's behavior, President Trump rhetoric and policies, external factors like COVID, or something else altogether?
I think it's two major things. One thing is just a reduction in money flows. So there's just less portfolio money that's going into China, and that's always going to, when money is flowing into China from America, it's always going to bring with it a lot of business lobbying and a lot of positive opinions, positive interactions with China. So I think that was always going to happen as the amount of investment capital came down. But I think the critical issue really is Xi Jinping. So since he took over in 2012 and officially in 2013, and think of all the things that he's really screwed up. He starts this Belt and Road Initiative, which really has no particular purpose except to obscure China's money management, because after all, we have plenty of multilateral institutions to invest in these countries, and China just wanted to dominate one such institution. He's managed to antagonize an awful lot of the countries that have been targeted by the Belt and Road Initiative. The first focus of the BRI was Southeast Asia, and instead of creating new alliances in Southeast Asia, he antagonized Southeast Asia and sort of moved the Belt and Road west. So there's that. There's the domestic initiatives like building the mega cities, which are going to be huge, 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 the Pearl River Delta and connecting it with Hong Kong and making it into a new metropolis, and the area around Beijing and Tianjin. Now you just don't hear anything about that because it's been such a failure and such a money sink. But in fact, Hong Kong has gone totally the other direction. So it's becoming, it's another Chinese city, as miserable, as dirty, as locked down, as corrupt as a Zhuhai, rather than becoming part of a broader, more open area in the Pearl River Delta. I could go on for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask a kind of a basic question here? When you start thinking about a lot of the stuff that has gone on from China's point of view, and the Belt and Road was one, maybe relationship with North Korea, with Russia, the relationship with the U.S., with what happened in Hong Kong, a lot of things. Do they really not seem to care about how they are perceived globally? Where does this agnostic attitude towards how they're perceived globally come from? Don't they think that it would behoove them to improve that?
Well, I think that I would point to two things. One is a pivot point in China where when Deng Xiaoping took over, walked out of prison and into Zhongnan High, he began a policy of opening, and a lot of the policy of opening was focused on attracting foreign direct investment. And there were a lot of reasons for that. But, one key reason, obviously, was that, China desperately needed foreign capital. So as part of that initiative to attract foreign investment, he mobilized the whole country to go on a charm offensive with foreigners, for good and for bad. But it certainly worked with the foreigners, particularly with Americans, where you had CEOs from all over the world coming to Beijing and doing these visits with China's top leaders who all spoke charmingly excellent English and talked about openness. Deng Xiaoping decreed that everybody had to start wearing jackets and ties rather than Sun Zhongshan suits. They built 5-star hotels because they knew that Westerners wanted that kind of thing. They built a straight road from the airport to the hotel. They made it really easy. I remember going around China in the 1990s and seeing, banners strung across streets that said, "Welcome foreign investors, welcome Japanese foreign investors." Imagine that 20 years earlier wouldn't have happened. So what happened was that there was a particular moment, I really put it in 1998 when when Unicom listed, which I can explain, but it's kind of a little bit wonky. When China's leadership discovered the portfolio investment gig rather than direct foreign investment, they discovered that actually you can raise a whole lot of money through IPOs and other types of market financing operations, rather than messing around with one-to-one negotiations with foreign companies. So they started to focus on that, and they lost the goodwill of the business community. So in the late 1990s, you had these delegations of the heads of U.S. corporations walking around the halls of Congress, knocking on doors and saying, China really needs to get most favored nation status. They need to enter the WTO. China's on a trajectory, la, 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 la. So as they stopped being able to get meetings with China's leaders, as China stopped caring about them, they stopped doing that. And ultimately, that was very detrimental to China's interests.
There's so much there to unpack.
Yeah, I mean, there's the other point, but it's a little bit of an esoteric point. The other point is that I think with autocratic, verticalized governments where you don't have any democratic rule, it's much easier and much more likely that they use particular how can I say that it's that they use all or nothing tactics to negotiate over everything. So, the silliest, smallest things like giving Liu Xiaobo the Nobel Prize, you can cut off your whole financial relationship with Norway over that. That autocratic governments are able to play this brinksmanship and do a all or nothing negotiation over issues that they care about in order to force them down. So, for example, you find China, brazenly creating new fake passports for gymnasts who are underage because it's just not worth it. You raise the bar so high to challenging them on small issues that it's just not worth it. And so you get away with a whole lot of things. So I think that creates a lot of resentment too. Same thing with North Korea. It's it's a zero-sum game. You treat absolutely everything as a zero-sum game because it's more important to maintain the image of infallibility than it is actually to accomplish policy.
Looking ahead at a high level, what can we expect now from U.S.-China relations now that Biden is in?
What Biden and his team realize is that China actually has always been amenable to negotiation, that the Xi Jinping government has not been a great one, and China clearly is a competitor of ours and an antagonist of ours, and is never going to be sort of in our
best
camp,
friends
and best friends. However, they have negotiated, they have changed a lot of policies in reaction to negotiations with the United States. So to withdraw from trade pacts and then try to renegotiate them bilaterally has clearly not been successful. So the first thing to do is to rejoin the TPP, which is something that, I used to be a critic of the TPP from the left because I thought it was too much in favor of American corporate interests. China hates the TPP, so it was really kind of funny how Trump withdrew. I don't think Trump knew anything about it, but he just withdrew from it because it was a trade pact. So there's that. There's enforcing the WTO agreements and using the WTO mechanisms. But then there's also the Biden administration's focus on mending our own fences. So rebuilding our own domestic infrastructure, investing in our own technology and our own universities, investing in immigrants who are well qualified and can come to study in the United States, and then drawing a few red lines. So instead of saying, we're going to ban Huawei and ZTE, instead figure out where they are a threat and draw lines around those institutions, those geographies where you don't want Chinese technology to participate.
We recently had John Pomfret from the Washington Post on the show. I think we released his podcast a couple of weeks ago. Definitely, for those listening, worth going back and listening to that one as well. He thought that a lot of people might be surprised in the Biden administration's approach to China and how it may be more similar to the Trump administration's approach than most people would guess, maybe naively thinking that Biden will always and forever be the exact opposite of Trump in everything that they do, where this is actually going to be something where they actually may be more alike than people think. Do you expect, and to what level, that U.S.-China relations under Biden might actually stay the same?
Yeah, I think that's kind of silly, because I think that what that's trying to say really is, if you look at the China relationship with the optic, do we love China or do we hate China, then maybe Biden still kind of hates China, or, at least he doesn't love China. But that's not the point at all. And in fact, even Trump was not at all consistent on this point. Initially, Xi Jinping was his best friend in the world, and China was a great success, and he wanted to save jobs for ZTE. And, it was really only in the election cycle that he started on the hate China thing. But it wasn't coordinated across government agencies. It wasn't driven by any strategy or any policy, and that's the critical issue. So for example, you had in the Trump administration, you had the USTR off in its corner, developing this almost kind of mad scientist level of detail in trade policy, basically trying to recreate all the WTO service agreements, and then claiming that China had not agreed to them, and that they'd agreed, and then Xi Jinping had vetoed it at the last minute, and wasn't a disaster. Actually, it was a great example of very poor coordination across the U.S. government agencies and lack of understanding of what the Chinese were saying. That problem will go away. So if you have a trade negotiation with the Biden government, you're going to have an actual trade negotiation rather than a one-sided fantasy.
What do you expect to be Biden's top priorities now with respect to China? I mean, there's diplomacy, there's foreign relations, there's money, there's economy, there's manufacturing, there's technology, there's security. Where do you feel that he's probably going to start focusing most often out of the gate?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's a whole set of security issues that I'm not really very competent on. I would say that the top priority probably will be and should be human rights. Now, that's a very difficult one, because I don't think that there's any way, practically to change China's policy on Xinjiang or on Hong Kong. But there are ways to ameliorate it, or to make things easier for the people who manage to get out of Xinjiang or Hong Kong. But I would think that would be a key focus, because it's very urgent. There are people being hurt and dying right now.
What about at home in the West? Is Biden going to be at all driven by trying to improve what happens here in the West with regards to the racial tensions that go on? Because as we saw, once Trump was driving a negative narrative towards China, it had a lot of implications and ramifications here at home as well. Is that something that we can maybe look forward to being something positive where, although we may want to go after China on a few things, we still have to try to improve those relations and the optics so that at home things start to calm down?
I mean, look, I've been very impressed with Biden's willingness to directly discuss and confront the issue of white supremacy in politics. And I think that an awful lot of his appointments and early term policies seem to be focused on dealing with the issue of white supremacy. I'm not sure the China policy really has very much to do with that. It's a very separate thing. My husband's Chinese, and so my children are Eurasian looking, and my daughter I have a very clear sort of dividing point because my daughter came to the United States to go to college in 2014, and then Trump was elected in 2016. So we have a very clear, my son had already been here, but with her we have a very clear dividing line. And she went to a progressive university in Washington D.C., but in 2016 the change was night and day. People started to call her racial slurs. They started to, heckle her. She got comments about being Chinese a whole bunch of times when she hadn't at all before 2016. And 2016, the U.S. was still, at least, Trump was still great friends with China. So I don't really think that the racism is particularly related to his new hostility toward China. There's the COVID thing. And that's unfortunate, but I feel like we're going to get over that.
The U.S. seems to be handling COVID pretty well now. They've got a handle on vaccines. They seem to be bringing a lot in. How do you think that narrative is going to turn around for the U.S.? And how do you think that narrative on the other side of the ocean for China is going to play out?
China is very, very focused on the image of the party externally, right, and on showing that it just breezes right through crises. And that happened in the Asian economic crisis, it happened in the great global financial crisis, and it happened in COVID. And China got a lot of deserved praise for the way that it handled COVID. I have a hunch that may turn around now. That the U.S. is starting to get on top of COVID, and COVID is actually back in China, and China is using very, very, very severe lockdowns. But the vaccine seems to be distributed only to the sort of top tier people in the top tier cities, there's a little bit of a focus on China's exporting its vaccine, and I have a feeling that things might get worse in COVID for China.
Let's talk a little bit on the economic side of things. Do you see an end to the tariff war over the next 4 years with Biden?
Well, I mean, there's the broad answer and the narrow answer. The broad answer is, no, because there are going to continue to be very important trade frictions and, barriers erected to having China, export certain things to the United States. But yes, in that the strategies that were applied by Trump have been harmful to the U.S. and not harmful to China. So the retaliatory tariffs on soybeans, how much is the Midwest lost from that, and will it ever recover? And all of the tariffs, in fact, have made certain types of U.S. goods more costly and have only increased the Chinese trade surplus with the United States. So I really don't see what's been accomplished. However, there are very serious issues that need to be addressed. It's just not addressed by, announcing big tariffs.
Okay, so let's turn it to the technology race. How do you see the U.S.-China competition going over the next 5 years? And if I may, how is security concerns over hardware and technology and even software, how is that going to play and potentially be another runner in this race?
Yeah, it's a very difficult set of issues because, what the IT revolution has created more than anything is a borderless world. And that means both national borders and sort of industrial borders domestically and borders among different types of appliances, you might say. So even though I just said I think that you should draw a red line around particular geographies and particular institutions which should not have Chinese technology in them, I mean, suppose you have a Chinese device that cracks somebody's garage opener, and the garage opener uses the same code that the router uses, and the router is used by the guy who lives in the house who works for the Defense Department. It's very, very hard to erect barriers among these different technologies, and it's very clear that the Chinese tech establishment does represent a national security threat to the U.S. and also a commercial threat because of many, many years of stealing and replicating technologies. So, sorry, what was the question? How to deal with that? That's the $1 million question.
With every good TV series or short form series, there's always new actors presented during every new season, and so we have a new season in the U.S.-China Netflix drama. What or who do you think are going to be some new actors that we all get to become familiar with in this next season?
Ooh, but the point of China is that they have these dramas where you never remember the stars or you never see the stars, right? It's all like this one gray, panel. For a long time there was there are always these favorite figures who are preferred by Western media because they speak English and they're willing to take interviews. So Liu He was one of those for the first several years of Xi's administration because, he's been to the Kennedy School and he speaks really good English and he sounds really sophisticated. He's an intelligent guy. So, you tend to pin your view of the Chinese administration on these particular figures, Yang Jiechi, Liu He, these people who are, have this kind of Mandarin finish and speak English very well. It doesn't mean that they're actually the important actors. On the U.S. side, who has been important on the U.S. side? I guess Lighthizer, sort of, but pretty much it's been a Trump game all the way, and that's because that's the way he wanted it. So I do think that now you're going to start to have the tier 2 and tier 3 people who are actual China experts, like Kurt Campbell and blah blah, who's at the NSC, but even Jake Sullivan, people who are don't have the same profile as Biden or Trump, but actually have a lot of expertise and a lot of focus on the relationship. So on our side, that's who's going to be important. On the Chinese side, we're not going to know.
And thank you so much for coming back on the show and doing this for us.
A pleasure. Great. Take care. Talk to you soon, I hope.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见.